It all started with an impulsive decision to escape for a long weekend. Winter was dragging on, and the holidays had come and gone, leaving behind that bleak, gray stretch of January where the world feels permanently stuck in twilight. I hate January. So when my friend Eric suggested we rent a cabin up in Frosthaven Hill, I didn't hesitate. It was supposed to be a quiet, snowy getaway, just the two of us. The cabin wasn't far, maybe a 2-hour drive from the city, perched in the middle of nowhere, on an unassuming patch of Appalachian forest. I remember Eric finding it on one of those rental sites. The pictures made it look charming. A cozy A-frame nestled against a backdrop of snow-laden pines, complete with a wood-burning stove and a loft bedroom that overlooked a frozen creek. It wasn't until we were halfway there that the first red flag appeared. The snow had already started falling by the time we reached the access road. It wasn't just flurries, it was like a thick, relentless cascade that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The GPS signal kept cutting out, leaving us blindly following a narrow, winding path. I kept glancing at Eric, who seemed unusually tense. "I thought you said this place was popular," I muttered. The road was deserted, no tire tracks, no sign of life anywhere. He told me that the reviews he had read online were great. He suggested that maybe we're just early in the season, though he didn't sound very convinced himself. I didn't buy it. Something about the silence outside the car was too heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. By the time we reached the cabin, I was ready to call it a night and crack open the whiskey we'd brought along. The cabin itself was fine. At first glance, it was exactly as advertised. Rustic, cozy, and blanketed in snow. But stepping inside felt off somehow, like walking into a stranger's house instead of a rental. The air was stale, and the furnishings were worn in a way that felt less charming and more forgotten. I unpacked while Eric started a fire in the stove. The wind was already howling outside, and the snow was piling up fast. I joked about being snowed in by morning, but Eric didn't find it very funny. The first night passed uneventfully, though I barely slept. I don't know if it was the unfamiliar setting or the way the wind seemed to scream against the windows, but something kept me on edge. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps crunching in the snow outside, but when I peeked through the curtains, there was nothing there. Just an empty, moonlit yard swallowed by the blizzard. The next morning, we realized we no longer had cell service. Eric tried to brush it off, saying the storm probably knocked out a tower, but I noticed the way his hand shook when he set his phone down. He was nervous too. The snow had buried the car up to its doors, and the nearest town was miles away. We were officially stuck. It wasn't until we found the door in the floor that things started getting strange. I was rifling through the pantry looking for something to make for lunch when I noticed a corner of the rug bunched up near the wood pile. Beneath it was a small iron ring embedded in a trap door. "Hey, did you see this?" I called to Eric. He came over, and for a second, we both just stared at it. The ring was stiff and ice cold to the touch, like it hadn't been moved in years. We debated whether or not to open it. Eric was hesitant, but curiosity got the better of me. When I pulled the door open, it revealed a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The basement, or whatever it was, didn't match the rest of the cabin. It was unfinished, with dirt walls and a low ceiling. The air was damp and smelled faintly of rotting wood. There were no lights, so we used the flashlights on our phones to explore. At first, it seemed empty. Then Eric spotted the carvings. All along the walls, there were these strange, jagged symbols etched deep into the dirt, and they weren't some random thing. They formed intricate patterns that made my stomach churn just looking at them. In the center of the room was a shallow pit, lined with smooth stones. Inside the pit, there was a pile of burned objects, charred scraps of wood, and blackened bones that looked too big to be animal, and what looked like a melted and deformed doll. Eric glances at me with an uneasy gaze and mutters, "We shouldn't be here." He was pale, and I could hear the tremor in his voice. I wanted to agree, but something about that pit held my gaze. It was almost hypnotic, the way the shadows seemed to flicker and writhe like living things. When we finally climbed back up and closed the trap door, the cabin felt colder. That night, the power went out. The temperature plummeted, and the stove struggled to keep up. We layered on blankets and huddled in the loft, listening to the storm batter the walls. Around midnight, I heard it again. Those footsteps in the snow. This time they were louder, closer, like someone or something was circling the cabin. I nudged Eric awake and we both sat in silence, straining to hear. A soft scraping noise came from the front door. Then, a slow, deliberate knock. We didn't move. Neither of us dared to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped, but the sound of footsteps lingered, pacing back and forth just outside the walls. When morning came, we found the front door wide open. The snow outside was untouched. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. The next few days blurred into a walking nightmare. Strange things kept happening. The firewood we'd stacked by the stove would disappear, only to reappear in odd places like the bathroom or the middle of the kitchen floor. Shadows danced across the walls even when there was no light to cast them. Eric became withdrawn, refusing to talk about what we'd seen. One night, I woke up to find him standing by the window, staring out at the woods. When I asked him what he was doing, he just said, "It's watching us," and climbed back into bed without another word. The final straw came when I found him down in the basement, crouched by the pit. He didn't seem to hear me when I called his name. His eyes were wide and fixed on something I couldn't see. When I finally managed to pull him away, he whispered, "It wants us to stay." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. We left the next morning. The storm had finally eased up a bit and we managed to dig the car out enough to make it back to the main road. To this day, I don't know what we encountered in that cabin. Eric won't talk about it and part of me doesn't blame him. Sometimes late at night, I dream of that trap door and all the weird symbols carved into the earth. And sometimes when I wake up, I swear I hear footsteps in the snow outside my window.